Welcome to Landmark Talks Property, a podcast by Landmark Information Group that covers all things property in short and intelligent podcasts.
Hello, I'm your host, David Lee, and welcome to the latest podcast from Millar Bryce. This is the first in a series of cross-border conveyancing chats with our dynamic duo of Liz Jarvis and Richard Hepburn. Liz is Director of Legal Search at Landmark, and Richard is Managing Director of Millar Bryce and Director for Scotland for Landmark. Now, we're bringing Liz and Richard together to discuss a whole range of issues around data, technology, regulation, and much more that affect the industry across the whole of the UK, and to look at some similarities and differences across the border, hence the cross-border conveyancing chat. So let's introduce you first of all, Liz. A lot of people in the industry will know who you are. But for those who don't, just give us a little bit of a potted history of your career to date. A
potted history. So I've been in the industry for 30 years. I started in OneSearch, almost hot foot from uni. Started in the reception. I've done a whole myriad of roles. My most favourite one, though, was definitely the roadie role, where I used to go up and down to collect data 3 times a week between Glasgow and Aberdeen. And then I moved into management roles until eventually in 2019, the business was acquired by the Landmark Information Group. I was the managing director at that time. And I've continued very happily at Landmark now in a divisional role across legal and search.
Okay, sorry, tell us a bit more about that roadie role, about the data. Just explain that. That sounds interesting.
So when people used to get searches from us, there were always, although we data banked, there were always information that we had to go out to the local authority or the water companies to get. So I used to drive up to Aberdeen City, Inverurie, Banff. My favourite was Stonehaven. I used to go and sit out there and have my lunch when I would be going on to collect roads information to tell people whether or not the roadway outside the property was adopted or not, or whether they were connected to the drainage.
Did you have a chippy at Stonehaven?
Oh, always. And I used to have to fight the seagulls off to keep it down in the harbour. But yes, I loved that roadie role. It was fantastic.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. And Richard, just give us a little potted history of your own career and how you came to where you are now.
Yeah, well, I'm slightly different to Liz. I'm a relative newbie in this sector, only about just over 8 years. So I started life as a civil engineer. So kind of got into mapping then, which I'm kind of using now, and then decided that wasn't kind of business orientated enough. So I went into retail for a bit. So I worked for IKEA, I worked for Early Learning Centre, chain of toy shops. And probably what traumatised me most about coming back to Glasgow is that I was sent up from the head office from Early Learning Centre to Glasgow to the opening of the new store in Buchanan Street. And the staff there decided, here's the new graduate from head office, we'll dress him up as Fireman Sam. In this Fireman Sam outfit with a 3-foot diameter paper mache head. So if you can imagine spending a day in Buchanan Street, that was quite interesting. So I went on from that actually, and I've spent the last 25 years in business-to-business services of various types, various industries, aviation services, market research. And I think for that, it's all just about professional clients, experts. I've been managing experts of different types, and quality and on-time delivery are what it's all about. So that's what we do today. Okay. So 8.5 years at Millar Bryce.
We'll definitely look for that Fireman Sam picture when we do this. We do a story to accompany this podcast. So cross-border conveyancing chats. Really, why we're doing that is, Liz, you are working exclusively in the English market, even though you're based in Scotland, and Richard, you're firmly focused on Scotland. So we've got interesting perspectives from you both. Liz, first of all, to you, we're talking in April 2026 when we're recording this podcast. So much uncertainty at the moment with what's going on in the world, and a lot of chat going on about a softening of the housing market. You know, how do you see it? And I guess what's interesting to me is you must have seen it many times before, that geopolitical events kind of, have this backwash effect on the housing market. So how do you see the situation at the moment, and how do you reflect on when you've seen it before?
I reflect on it as it's more serious this time. And also, I now say quite often when we have meetings together in the senior team in Landmark, I can't call what's going to happen in the next month or two anymore, whereas in the past I always felt pretty equipped. I think that there's so much external to the UK which is influencing particularly the commercial market where we rely on overseas investment. The geopolitical situation, of course, the war in the Middle East is having a really big impact. I was there through this sort of 2006 as it went on to Lehman Bank falling, the big global economic crisis. But even then, there did always feel like some relative stability within your own country that wasn't being affected too much by things that were going on overseas. This time it is, which makes it much more difficult to say from one month to the next how we expect it to go. So typically at the start of the year, January and February are always seasonally quiet months. And then what we see is in March, it begins to build until April and May because people buy really in the spring, or they move in the spring and the autumn. But this year we haven't seen that build to the same extent. It's been very slow growth. So I am always reluctant at this moment in time to say where I think we'll be in a month or even 2 months' time. I don't want to stray into the realms of political figures, but there's some big, larger-than-life political figures here which are not easy to know how they're going to move next.
And anything to add to that, Richard, as to how you see, the current situation relative, as Liz said, to what we've seen before, and how do you kind of, how does everybody hold the nerve at a time like this?
Well, that's interesting. I think we've got to. I mean, we keep having to convince our colleagues that, and just tell it as it is. I think just being honest about what's happening in your local market. I think it's a bit early yet. We haven't really seen the impact of Iran yet. I think it's not really an issue. Although anything that ultimately, is going to impact people's affordability, they'll hunker down. They'll probably just want to cocoon themselves for a bit until this hopefully goes away. I think it was interesting, actually. I was speaking to a friend at the weekend, and his daughter works for one of the big top-end estate agencies in London. And she was saying that they've had an absolute flight of Middle Eastern money coming in to look at high-end properties. So literally they're really busy as that money's trying to find a safer home. So whether we'll see that in Scotland, because I mean, we don't have as many here. So yeah, I think it's a bit early to see what the real impact is.
Yeah, and Liz, how do you hold your nerve in a situation like this? You say it's difficult. What do you say to clients? How do you kind of reassure them?
For me, the housing market always goes in cycles. It will always come back because it drives the UK economy. So whatever happens, this market will come back. People will gain confidence over time. When some people are losing, other people are winning, and that creates opportunity. So the market will come back, and I would reassure people of that. For those that are working in the market just now, what we're seeing now is fewer buyers, but they're committed buyers. So in the past, you could see anything up to 25%, sometimes a bit more than that, of a fall-through rate of people starting on the process, but then never actually fully concluding to buying the property at the end of it. That fall-through rate is now going down because the people that are there have to buy. They're here because they need to move. Yep. So we have that stability. Affordability will not be such a big issue because there are not as many buyers around. So we'll start to see house prices becoming, dare I say it, more affordable, but maybe more realistic again, which will encourage people to come back. Inflation will settle. Interest rates will settle. And then we will see a resurgence again. But the government will always look to keep energy within the property market. It drives so much else in our economy. So I would ask people just to stand firm about it. And if you're committed to buying, go and do it. It's a good time to do it if you're committed.
Okay, great stuff. And so let's look a little bit more into the detail, Richard. Now, there's market insights are really important, and Landmark and Millar and Bryce in Scotland are really crucial in providing some of those market insights. So what are we seeing at the moment? How Let's look at listings first of all. How's Scotland kind of looking at listings in the early part of 2026?
Well, it's interesting because we produce a property trends report as Landmark every quarter. So I was actually, I didn't have a bank holiday yesterday. I was working on the numbers for that. So it's very, very fresh in the mind. I mean, listings really ended up 2025 pretty strongly. And that actually carried over into January. So, above last year. And then we've just seen a gradual slide. So by the time we got to March, we were back to parity really with last year. So again, there's seasonal effects there, as Liz said, and we were just at a point in the year when you'd expect listings to be a bit better. So we'll I mean, again, it's too early to call whether Iran hits that, but yeah, I mean, there's maybe signs the market's slightly softening. I know reading some other commentators in the Scottish market, they were trying to encourage people to get out there and list their property, because once that slows up, it starts to slow everything else up.
Yeah.
So we really need to get people out there. So yeah, the seasonality is important. I think Liz talked about the other aspect of seasonality is just, I mean, January and into early March were pretty dire from the end of January onwards. I just think the weather was horrendous this year, and you might sound like a simple thing, but if it's really dark and dull and wet and damp, it's not really encouraging either to show your property or go out and view properties. So I think that probably impacted us a bit more than it normally does at the beginning of this year.
Yeah. And what about in England, Liz, in terms of not just listings, but how are they mapping across into sales subject to missives and also into completions? What are you seeing in the English market?
Well, listings have remained quite strong. In fact, Boxing Day saw a huge number of people jump onto the big property sites, Zoopla, Rightmove, etc., and be looking at property, but also getting ready to list. So it was strong. So actually, there are still quite a number of properties out there for sale, and it's increasing. But in terms of completions, they're probably not as high as we would like them to be. But like I say, the people who are in the market and out there just now applying for mortgages, going out and viewing properties are committed buyers. So although we may see less of them, they will go all the way through to transaction.
And what are the other factors affecting buyers' behaviour, Liz? Obviously, there's this geopolitical noise in the background. There's the issue of affordability that you touched on earlier on. Yes. What are the other considerations that you think are affecting the English market in particular at the moment?
Well, even the market in general, I would say that we've a different profile of buyer now from a way back in the last economic crisis. We have first-time buyers who actually are not forced to buy anymore. They can stay at home. They're allowed, that their parents will let them stay in their bedroom into their 30s now. Not so much, 20 odd years ago.
We're just laughing at that.
Yeah. It wasn't quite the same. People are not feeling the need to move out of the family home anymore. Parents are more accommodating. They're also, younger people are happier now to spend their money on different things rather than saving for mortgages and pensions and some of those things. It's not everybody, but certainly the impetus to move is not as strong or as necessary as it used to be. But first-time buyers will always make up around a third of the market. If it drops down any 30 to 40%, if it drops down any less than that, that can be quite concerning. So I'm at this exact moment in time at the beginning of April, I'm not quite sure where our numbers are with first-time buyers. So, but as long as that stays buoyant, the market should be. But the demographic's different now.
Okay. Anything to add what Liz has just said, Richard? And also, how is it looking in Scotland in terms of sales subject to missives and completions?
It's a bit like Liz said, actually. The same pattern, really. I think it was very quiet through the early part of the year. We actually saw a bit of a flurry just before Easter, the last 2 weeks before Easter. I think that's usually fairly normal. I mean, what you tend to see is a lot of house builders trying to get plots off their books before the financial year end. There's just a flurry to get things through. So that was encouraging, but how and whether that will last into the next quarter, we'll just have to see. I mean, obviously we have the benefit up here, as Liz knows, I spend a lot of my time with Landmark explaining this, of just a much more efficient property transaction process, which I know Liz agrees with. But it just means we perhaps don't see some of the same blockers that exist in England, and it just works a little bit more smoothly. There are issues in the Scottish market as well, which obviously are universal, but I think often when we look at the statistics, we tend to track more like the north of England, because the house values are more equivalent to Scotland on average, and I think the same sort of demographics tend to exist there, whereas I think the English market can get distorted by the sort of richer south, which tends to make the full England stats just a little bit different, whereas when we look at more detailed stats in the north of England, we're more like that.
And I think also because the process is so protracted in England, and the further south you go, then it can be, that can be more marked, means that during that time when people are waiting around to move, they can become seduced by other properties and other deals and things. So for that reason, just the extended period of time that it takes to actually complete invites other factors into the transaction which can cause fall throughs. So the quicker we can start to reduce that transaction time, we will see much greater efficiency within it. But there is a huge difference between the Scottish and English time taken to sell and buy.
And is that a frustration for you?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much. And a lot of it is because Scotland has become extremely efficient at offering data online. Local authorities have got a lot of smart data out there, which is easier to access, where it's more difficult to access it south of the border.
Okay.
Well, I know Liz and some of our other colleagues are desperately trying to push the whole upfront information agenda, because that's what makes it more efficient, or one of the key reasons is upfront information.
It's allowing people to get access to information around the property from an estate agent before they move further into the process, which with a property that may not be suitable for them. So just as a very quick example, if you were going to buy a property and you had an idea that you wanted to make it for multi-generational living, for example, you wanted your parents to move in, but what you didn't know right at the outset was that someone had sought planning approval for that a few years ago and had never been granted it. Well, you would not find that information out until far later on in the process, at which point then you've invested money, time, energy into a sale that's not the right property for you. So the more information we can give people right at the outset, again, secures committed buyers who will stay in the process.
Okay, thank you. And so we've talked there, Richard, about the Scottish market, broadly speaking, a bit more stable, maybe a bit less volatile than the English market. But obviously, having talked about geopolitical events, there are political events as well. And we're recording this in early April, about a month out, in fact, exactly a month out from the Scottish Parliament elections. What kind of impact do you think that might potentially have? Because it's a very interesting election. We've got really, it's a six-way election, because we've obviously got the SNP, Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dems, and now Green and Reform increasingly showing up well in the polls. So it's a difficult one to call. Yep. What kind of impact do you think the election might have?
Well, I think it's interesting. One of my colleagues was at an event that John Curtis, obviously the renowned Scottish pollster, was at a few weeks ago, and he agreed with you, David. He just said this is by far and away the hardest election to call, and I think the combination of the sort of the proportional representation just adds a lot more complexity to that as well. I think we're obviously monitoring what the impact might be, and that is, as you say, is hard to call. But I think there are probably 4 or 5 areas that are are going to be constant, whoever comes in, and whether they get ratcheted up or down will depend on the mix of, or the coalition nature of how it all ends up. So things like, I mean, Liz talked about first-time buyers. I mean, some of the parties are already talking about giving first-time buyer support. I mean, I think the last time they did it, it ran out very quickly because they ran out of money. But again, it's something that can really stimulate the market. There's also been a huge assault on the private rental sector, and that's affected landlords and people with portfolios of properties. I think if somebody was to ratchet back some of the pressure on them, that could help stimulate some stuff. There's obviously the energy efficiency bill, you know, the upgrading of legacy properties to meet new energy standards. I mean, how that ends up being executed and what relaxations will be given will be another interesting area. And I think the other one that's floating around more for landowners is the land reform bill. I mean, that's awaiting royal assent. Whoever, you know, if the SNP take the lead, it was their bill. But if they're ended up propped up by the Greens or Reform or Labour, whoever it is, that's going to have a big impact on how that actually lands when it's executed. And all of these areas are things where, as a business, both locally as Millar Bryce and as Landmark, we're pretty well equipped to support in all those areas. So that's why it's important we keep a good handle on it.
Yep. Okay. There's lots to talk about, Liz. And Richard talked about energy efficiency there, but let me talk about energy. Energy prices is another, obviously, an issue that is very big at the moment. Prices at the pumps, but also the prices people are paying for the energy at home. We look like we might be moving into a period of more stable inflation interest rates. And again, everything's thrown up in the air a little bit. Again, how do you see, you know, inflation, interest rates, energy prices playing out in house buying decisions as well? That's a big question, isn't it? That's quite a lot there.
No, but I mean, I think fundamentally anything that affects affordability is going to affect the housing market, and all of these things affect affordability and confidence. The biggest thing that drives the market is how confident people feel. And when people feel uncertain about their own financial situation, they will not move into a purchase as massive as a new property. I do not think that throughout 2026 we are going to see much energy pricing stability. I think that this will continue for a period to come. And I think that will absolutely have an impact on the market. I think that in inflation, energy prices, wage inflation, and interest rates, of course, which this year we were sitting at the end of 2025 saying, there'll be another 2 points reduced on interest rates from the bank. None. Of course, they've stayed stable. There are people now who are actually calling, they think there could be increases this year in it. So anything like that's going to have an impact. And I think 2026 will be, unfortunately, an uncertain year for it.
Coming to a close, Richard, how do you see the Scottish market at the moment? How would you summarise where we are now?
Well, I think you were looking for some sort of positive statement to finish off. I mean, I think given we work right across the market, so we're dealing with everything from one-bed flats in city centres right through to some of the largest renewables and infrastructure projects in Scotland. And I think it was an area that's going to be counter possibly to the oil challenges that we may well be facing. It is the renewable sector. There's so much investment already gone into that in Scotland. And we've actually got solutions that are helping people meet those challenges. So I think if there's an area that's going to give green shoots, that's it.
And Liz, a final green shoot from you?
Just that in my experience, this market is so critical to the UK that there will always be injections, or whether it's initiatives, financial, to bring it back into stability again. I've always seen that. We always strive as a culture of owner-occupiers in the UK to do that. So I think that whilst we may see a period of uncertainty being a bit more protracted than we'd hoped in 2026, I really don't see it lasting much beyond that.
Thank you very much indeed to Liz Jarvis and Richard Hepburn for their terrific insights today. And listen out in future for more of their cross-border conveyancing chats. This podcast was presented by me, David Lee, and produced by Podcast Studio Glasgow. And please listen out for more Millar and Bryce podcasts, including the excellent Handbook series.
Thank you for listening to Landmark Talks Property. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, please hit subscribe. This podcast is for general purposes only. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not constitute professional advice.